Miami International Airport, where U.S. Army Sergeant LaDavid Johnson is returning home for the final time. That is his family there on the screen. You see his pregnant wife and their 2 kids. Sergeant Johnson, one of 4 U.S. troops killed in the African country of Niger. This was during a situation there, a military situation, where he and his colleagues there, fellow service members, were completely unprepared to fight against the ISIS fighters who ended up attacking them during an ambush. We've been told that Sergeant Johnson's body was left there at the scene of this firefight for at least 2 days before his body was recovered. And so today the announcement that there is going to be an investigation by the Department of Defense into exactly what went down, how it was that the intelligence was so bad that Sergeant Johnson and his colleagues had no idea that they could have come under fire and were put in such a dangerous situation during this battle. U.S. troops on the ground in the African nation advising the local military there in Niger on how to fight against terror groups there. That's why LaDavid Johnson was there on the ground in the first place. But sadly, he and his colleagues coming under attack as we take a look at the plane that carried his body back to the United States and back to South Florida for the final time. We're told that later on this week there will be a viewing for Sergeant Johnson, followed by a funeral over the weekend in Cooper City. Again, if we take a look at the dignitaries who have gathered there to welcome Sergeant Johnson back one more time to South Florida. Again, his body returned on that Delta flight as we take a look at these live pictures coming to us from Miami International Airport. Again, the news today regarding this is that there's going to be an investigation. And there was some controversy over how quickly or how slowly President Trump was in responding and reaching out to the 4 families, including the Johnsons, who lost a loved one during this battle in Niger. The president defending himself yesterday during a news conference in the Rose Garden of the White House, saying that he had written letters to each of the families. He even went and suggested that other presidents before him, including President Obama, had chosen not to reach out with phone calls to families of fallen service members. That, of course, was a false statement, and President Trump has come under fire for that. Today, he tried to back off of those statements just a little bit. But again, some controversy over the way that the president and the administration has reached out to these families who have lost their loved ones on the ground during a U.S. military confrontation in the African nation of Niger. And here is the coffin that carries the remains of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson, who is from Miami Gardens and who went on to serve his country honorably, coming home a hero, a battlefield death after dying in the line of duty in combat in Niger. We've learned a little bit about Sergeant Johnson over the last couple of weeks since we learned of his death. I mentioned he has a wife who is pregnant. They also have 2 children, and so this is a very, very difficult time for them.
And also, we're hearing a member of his own unit will be escorting him off the plane today in just a few minutes. And actually, I think it's beginning right now.
Yeah, this is really, you know, this brings it home. You think about the war on terror, which has really been going on since the attacks on the U.S. on 9/11 in 2001, and how that war has taken U.S. service members to all parts of the world, including, of course, Iraq and Afghanistan, but also to other places like Niger, a country that a lot of people before till recently might not have even realized that we had troops on the ground in this African nation, but we do. They're there to assist the local law enforcement, local military there as they try to battle against terror forces, and you can just see the grief, and it's unimaginable. Yeah,
it's just awful. A baby on the way. We do know that his body will be going directly to the funeral home as it comes off this plane here. And when the camera pans over to the family and you see that grief, you see them sobbing there. It's just heartbreaking. Such a young person killed in Africa, with a lot of people, as you mentioned, not even realizing that there were operations going on there. And still a lot of questions about what those operations are, what the strategy was there, and how they came under fire. And there you see they're taking the cover off the coffin there.
Let's just pause for a moment and watch. And we can now see that the coffin is flag draped, as you would expect.
And his uncle who raised him, his mother, his aunt, all of them there. We saw them just a minute ago, and you see the flag on the coffin there as fellow service members go up to escort the body off the plane.
We're told that the sergeant was fighting with his fellow Green Berets, a part of the 3rd Special Forces Group based in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. There really are still, as Rudabeh mentioned, a lot of questions in terms of what went down, how this operation that they were carrying out in Niger, how it could have gone so horribly wrong to have left these 4 men in a position where they were basically defenseless. They came under fire by about 50 ISIS fighters. They had no idea that ISIS was there in the area. There had been no intelligence. And so that's one of the big questions of exactly how was it that there was no intelligence that let the U.S. military know that these troops were operating in such a dangerous spot. And again, the investigation officially launched today by the Defense Department, by the Pentagon, to try to get to the bottom of exactly how this could have happened. Again, we're watching these live pictures. This is a local boy who's coming home for the last time. Sergeant LaDavid Johnson of Miami Gardens, killed in the line of duty while fighting in the U.S. Army overseas in the African country of Niger, part of a military mission overseas to help local troops there on the ground in the African country to fight terrorism.
Just 25 years old, he was so young. Sergeant LaDavid Johnson of Miami Gardens. He was in the 3rd Special Forces Group. He was based in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, but was killed by extremists in African country of Niger. And those extremists were linked, according to government officials, to the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, and they were responsible for that attack. It was about 120 miles north of Niamey, which is the capital in Western Africa of that country. And there again is his family, including young children. And it's just heartbreaking to see their reactions right now.
It is, and you see some local officials there, dignitaries. There's a congresswoman there with them right now, Frederica Wilson, in her familiar hat, but they're seated there in front is the family of LaDavid Johnson, and behind them you see members of local law enforcement standing there to offer their support to this family, which is going to need all the support they can get. I mean, this is a very, very difficult thing that they are now going to have to deal with. Worth mentioning again that the sergeant's wife is pregnant with baby number 3, who is slated to come sometime over the next several months. They have 2 other young children, and she said that when they came and knocked on her door, Carrie Cott, our colleague, spoke with Sergeant Johnson's wife. There she is, and she said that when the military came and knocked on her door, that her world changed.
Yeah, again, just 25 years old. He enlisted in the Army in 2014. He was a mechanic in the Army, and he had awards and decorations at just 25 years old. That includes the Army Achievement Medal, the Army Good Conduct Medal, the Global War on Terrorism Medal, the Army Service Ribbon, and the Army Parachutist Badge, as well as the Army Air Assault Badge and the Driver Mechanic Badge, and also the Marksmanship Qualification Badge. That's his picture again. He was a sharpshooter. We had reports on him when CBS Miami talked to his family. We learned a lot about him. Just a huge loss here for his 2 children and the 3rd on the way.
And a loss for the local community here in South Florida. This was a young man who rode his bike around town, and he was known for doing that. He worked at a local department store, I believe it was a Walmart, and then he decided to enter into the military. And we have learned today that the investigation that's going to look into exactly what went down in Niger is going to attempt to answer some very key questions, which are important to think about as we watch, again, the coffin of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson being taken off of this flight, having been flown back to South Florida for his viewing, his funeral, and his burial later in the week. That investigation is going to take a look at the ambush that broke out in Niger, and once it did, how did the body of Sergeant Johnson get left behind? Remember that the wounded and the other 3 men who were killed were taken from the battlefield rather quickly, but not Sergeant Johnson. His body remained behind and was actually unaccompanied for some 48 hours. And so that's a big window during which U.S. officials have really no idea what happened to him, whether he had survived, whether he was alive, whether he was in ISIS custody, whether he was killed instantly. Again, these are questions that need to be answered, that hopefully will be answered for the sake of his family and for the U.S. military during an investigation that the Pentagon has just announced today is going to be formally launched.
You see the various covers have been taken off the coffin there, including a plastic tarp, and now you see all of these service members. I mean, just the presence of law enforcement, of service members, of his family, of local dignitaries there kind of give you an idea of the gravity of all the lives that he's touched, of how he touched the community, and how an entire community right now is in mourning.
And again, the coffin now, as the pallbearers are in place, ready to receive the casket of Sergeant Johnson. The military protocol well rehearsed, unfortunately. But again, it's in moments like this that we are reminded that we are still a nation at war, and that there are men and women like Sergeant Johnson and so many others who put their lives on the line to keep us here at home safe.
And we can take a listen in right now as the coffin comes off the plane.
If you're just joining us at almost 20 after 5 here on a Tuesday afternoon, we're looking at live pictures from Miami International Airport as the casket of Green Beret Sergeant LaDavid Johnson of Miami Gardens, 25 years old, killed in the line of duty while fighting for our country overseas in the African nation of Niger, has returned home for the final time.
And going straight to the funeral home from here. Imagine how difficult that job is for those service members right now, all in front of his family, including his children, his mother, his aunt, his wife, who's pregnant with his third child. It's just a tragic scene right now at the airport.
Again, these are the military rituals, the traditions that have been in place. These men are trained to receive the bodies of fallen U.S. service members once they've been returned home. And so what we're seeing playing out here at Miami International Airport has played out time and time again over the years as the bodies of fallen service members fighting for our country in the war on terror and in other conflicts have been returned to the United States for burial.
And not always, by the way, in the public eye. At least now we're able to see the gravity of the situation. We're able to see the ceremony happening, taking place. It's not behind the scenes. It's for everyone to see in his community, all of those mourning him, and across the country and the world, really. We don't have audio, so we can't listen in, but you can tell just how sad it is and how grave it is just by looking at the expressions on the faces of everyone there and by seeing that coffin draped in an American flag.
Again, the sergeant's family is there to receive the body of their loved one.
Just 25 years old, and in addition to his death, we also lost 3 other U.S. soldiers in that attack. And also a soldier from Niger died along with them when they were apparently ambushed by dozens of people in that West African country.
Sergeant Johnson's wife, who I mentioned is pregnant and is named Maisha. She has a 2-year-old boy and a 6-year-old daughter with Sergeant Johnson. They are all there at the airport right now. We mentioned that she is pregnant, expecting a 3rd child. Here she is being brought up to the casket. She is pregnant and due with their 3rd baby in January.
This is just gut-wrenching to watch. And looking at the face of her daughter there, you also just wonder how she's able to talk about what has happened, how she's able to explain it to her very young daughter, and what's going through her mind right now as this casket comes off the plane draped in an American flag and goes straight to the funeral home.
Just an unimaginably sad situation playing out here in South Florida. Maisha Johnson, who met her husband when they were only 6 years old, she called him her soulmate, finding out that he had died after coming under attack from ISIS fighters in Niger on October the 4th.
Yeah, so about 2 weeks now since this happened, and still so many questions to be asked. Investigations are going to be launched. There are a lot of questions still, and a lot of people want answers as to how this happened, whether there's an intelligence failure, what the strategy was in the first place, why they were exactly where they were, why he was left there for as long as he was. But now he is back in South Florida. This is Miami International Airport. His wife, his daughter, his unborn child, greeting his coffin coming off a Delta flight at Miami International Airport.
We should mention that Sergeant Johnson went to Miami Carroll City Senior High School. He was known on social media as the Wheelie King 305 because he used to ride his bike all over town. He used to ride it to work. He graduated from a career training center, ATI. And he was a member of 5,000 Role Models of Excellence Project, and that is an organization that we have covered so many times over the years because of the amazing work that they do here in South Florida. One of their own coming back home tonight. And a final salute.
If you're just joining us, this is the coffin of 25-year-old Sergeant David Johnson, of Miami Gardens, killed in the African nation of Niger while serving there. Now home in South Florida, coming home for the last time, getting off the plane at Miami International Airport, where his family and various other dignitaries, law enforcement officials, service members greeted him and are now taking him directly to the funeral home.
There will be a public viewing for Sergeant Johnson from 4 to 8 p.m. on Friday, and a funeral from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Saturday at the Christ the Rock Church on Sterling Road in Cooper City. Sergeant Johnson will be laid to rest at Hollywood Memorial Gardens. And you can see the family now being ushered away as the hearse carrying the coffin will make its way to the funeral home. A very solemn, a very sad, and a very dignified ceremony taking place at Miami International Airport today. And we'll be right back.